Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending your Tuesday afternoon and evening with us. My name is Adam, Content Marketing Specialist with Schein, and I'll be your moderator. Tonight's webinar focuses on the basics of 3D printing surgical guides. Before I turn it over to Dr. Moody, I have a few reminders for you. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A section and we will answer them live at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive the recording next week via email. And this webinar is presented by Henry Schein Dental, and no CE credits are being offered for viewing or attending this presentation. I am excited to welcome back Dr. Justin Moody as our speaker. Dr. Moody is the founder and clinical director of Implant Pathway and maintains private practices. Thank you, Dr. Moody, for joining us. Take it away.
Perfect. Hope everybody can hear me. So appreciate you joining us on this webinar just a couple days before Thanksgiving. So some of you are probably frantically trying to see a few emergencies, or maybe you gave up on that and you're already into the holiday eggnog and so forth. So today I've been asked to talk a little bit about the basics of 3D printing and surgical guides, and it goes along with it. And I think we'll have a good time, and I'll share with you the workflow that we use in our teaching institute, as well as in our private practice and at the nonprofit center. So those of you that, many of you probably don't know me, my name's Dr. Justin Moody. I grew up in Western Nebraska, went to the University of Oklahoma Dental School, and returned back to my hometown in Western Nebraska to practice dentistry. And I immediately found that removable dentures and partials and stuff were just not going to cut it for me. So I had a great mentor that got me into implant dentistry, and that was really all it took. Took a maxi course at the University of Medical College of Georgia, and I felt compelled to try to get all the credentials that I could and to make myself better. You know, if you notice, I don't put a whole bunch of alphabet soup behind my name. I'm really only interested in doctors knowing and my patients knowing that I'm a dentist, because that's what I am. But I do love continuing education. I do love getting better, and I love to give back. A member of the American Academy of Implant Dentistry, the International Congress of Oral Implantologists, American Board of Oral Implantology. But today I'm most proud that I am myself and a group of very giving individuals founded New Horizon Institute, which is a nonprofit clinic in Phoenix, Arizona, that we use to do live implant training and live continuing education for dentists across the country. So at Implant Pathway and New Horizon, that's kind of what I do. I have a little bit of private practice. I still have a couple general dentistry offices, and I love to give back. So I've been very blessed with that. In talking about that, what we do have at New Horizon Institute and Implant Pathway is we have a clinic that places about 8,000 dental implants a year, courtesy of companies such as Henry Schein, BioHorizons, Sprintray, Meisingers, things like that. And what it allows us to do is really work on some key workflows and digital key pieces that really hopefully bring efficiency. I'm going to talk about technology, and I think that all technology is useful provided it can come back to your practice and either make it safer for the patient, make it more efficient, profitable, successful, predictable, all those things in your private practice. So one of the things that I've found that do all those things is the use of a surgical guide and the placement of dental implants. Now, not every implant can be surgically guided, and not every surgical guide should be used. But for aesthetic zone implants, single units, and even some edentulous arches, it can be a great tool for increasing the efficiency. So I want to talk a little bit about how we work these technologies into the practice, and hopefully at the end you have some questions for us along the way. So if we think about the surgical guide, it is really it's a simple equation to get to guided surgery. You need two things to get there. You need a ConeBeam CT. You're going to need the slices and a volume rendering that ConeBeam CT offers. And you're also going to need the surface scan of the patient, whether that comes from an impression, an intraoral scanner, but we need to create that into what's called an STL file. And sometimes I've heard people talk about STL files as straight to lab, if you want to remember that. Once we have these two items, the marriage of those two and within some planning software should ultimately yield a surgical guide to be presented. Now, the surgical guide also comes in the form of this STL file, and as you'll find, these open architecture softwares allow you to take an STL and to create, actually do the manufacturing of the guide itself. So when we talk about ConeBeam CT, what is that and how do we use it within that implant planning software? Well, the first thing we need a ConeBeam CT that renders a file called a DCM or a DICOM file. And almost all of them do that. There are some ConeBeam manufacturers that have a proprietary file output, but at the end of the day, everyone wants to export in what's called a DCM file. So here at New Horizon Institute, we actually use the Action X-Mind Prime. This is a fairly new ConeBeam unit to the market. This is our second generation of Action products, and what's really amazing about this machine is that it has a 10 by 12 sensor with an incredible image clarity, and it literally produces a DCM file, non-encrypted, easily exportable, and it also comes with some pretty amazing software that we're going to talk about, and not to mention that this machine, one of the few things in my career that have come down in price over the years. I bought the first ConeBeam CT to be used in private practice in the state of Nebraska back in 2006. And it doesn't seem like 14 years ago was that long ago, but I think that I paid over $220,000 for the time it was an iCat Classic. And today, we get a machine that's got better software, almost just as large a field of view, and it's under $50,000 with a warranty. So just one of those few things in life that the prices actually come down instead of up. So how do we get to the STL file? Well, we can do that a number of different ways. We could take a regular, we could take a PVS or an alginate impression, pour it up in stone. We could use a desktop scanner. Sometimes these scanners can even scan the impression itself without actually pouring it up into stone. At the New Horizon Clinic, we do have one of the new 3-shape laptop or benchtop scanners. There's all sorts of lab scanners out there available to you. Also, almost every intraoral scanner also outputs an STL file. Now, some of them do it without any pay per click. Some of these do it without any encryption, but almost all of them do it. We have the 3-shape Trios scanner, CEREC, most people have known, Plan Mecca. Well, we have the Plan Mecca Emerald S at New Horizon, which we use on a literally, I would say, daily basis, but truthfully, it's almost on a patient basis. Like we use it almost every time with our patients. There are some ConeBeam CT machines that will actually create an STL file from scanning a stone model itself, or even scanning an impression tray. I've had mixed results with that, and I prefer I literally prefer an intraoral scanner. Now, if you don't have one, a desktop scanner is fine. But I find if you don't have an intraoral scanner, you're probably not going to have a desktop scanner anyway. So just know that if you're going to send an impression to a dental laboratory, they're going to digitize it by way of a desktop scanner. So number of different machines out there. Not here to debate on which machines are better or worse here. So again, how do we get that? Really all we're getting the hard and the soft tissue model of the mouth and how it looks today. We also have, we also need the software. And so we have guided implant surgical software, planning software. A number of companies make this kind of software. And I'm going to be showing you, the surgical planning software through the Action software. Many of you may be familiar with 3Shape and 3Shape's Implant Studio, which is also used to plan surgical guides. Serona has CEREC has Simplant. We also on site have Plan Mecha Romexis, which is also excellent software in itself. And there are many, many others. There's some other free softwares out there, but these are who I consider probably some of the main players, with maybe one exception of some Blue Sky Bio in this section. All of these softwares are going to literally take that DCM file and that STL file and put them together. So if we think about how to create a surgical guide, there is a, once the surgical guide STL has been planned, most of us will 3D print the surgical guide as the top route would propose. It is also possible to CAD CAM and mill out your surgical guide. I find this to be a little more cumbersome and a little more wasteful of material, and definitely not as cost effective on the printing side as it is the use of 3D printers. And we've got Sprintray printers in our office in the clinic, and I'm going to talk predominantly about them, as that is what we have the most experience with and have had the best success with as well. So again, just an STL plus fabrication equals the surgical guide. There are a number of different printers on the market, and they range in price, they range in micron accuracy, they range in build plate size and the technology. I've owned a number of these on the screen. Today, we've settled in on the Sprintray Pro. We're going to go over that and some of the new features that it has as well. I think that you'll find quite interesting. These have definitely come down in price over time. Without a doubt. I think that the first 3D printers I bought just 3 years ago were $18,000 a piece, and now they're probably $10,000 cheaper than that. And I think that Sprintray is even much cheaper than that. So it is going to be your fastest solution for the creation of fabrication of a surgical guide. Sending it out to a third party is also possible and feasible, but if you want the most inexpensive, fastest route to fabrication of a surgical guide, it's going to be through the in-office use of a 3D printer. Now, the digital workflow starts for us within the Action software, and the AIS software is quite intuitive and is actually included in the purchase of the machine. So this is where I was first introduced to the Action software. Now, I have experience in the 3Shape Implant Studio as well. Just one of the downsides of the 3Shape is that there's a pretty decent fee for that software. And, with that, I think that Action is one of the very few softwares, ConeBeam CT softwares, manufacturer softwares that actually will allow you to create a surgical guide within the software and have it spit out an STL file that will that will work with our 3D printers. So this right here is the initial volume rendering of a ConeBeam CT. As you can see it, a patient is missing tooth number 19. And there's a few, I know this is about 3D printing, but there's a few things about ConeBeam CT that in conjunction with making good 3D prints that I'd like to go over. One of them is that you want to have some disclusion of the teeth. So the Action has a little bite stick that you bite on that allows for the disclusion of the teeth. Other machines put you in a chin cup, and what you'll need to do is have them bite on a cotton roll between their front teeth, because we want to get that separation. If you look at that image, you want to get the jaws separated enough that when we go to slice through that, we don't have the overlap of the teeth, which especially happens in the anterior section if the patient has a pretty deep bite. So what's next? We've taken the ConeBeam CT of the patient. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to import our STL from whatever scanning mechanism we had. So on the left side, you'll see data import, and we will bring in our STL file. Now, you can see from that upper left image that we have the scanned in lower arch. Now, how we put these two together is very intuitive in the software, and that is we want to be able to pick some corresponding points on both the ConeBeam CT and the STL model. So if you take a look at the 3D rendered image, you'll see a blue dot that says number 1, a green dot that says number 2, and a yellow dot which says number 3. You'll then go to the STL file from your surface scan, and you'll find the similar areas. So you can use a flat spot, you can use a cuss tip, anything that's got some anatomy to it. And we're going to place the 1, 2, and 3 on the ConeBeam CT, and then we'll make the same marks in the same areas on the STL file, and the program will bring the two together. Now, you do want to choose, a couple tidbits here. You do want to choose some points that don't have a lot of heavy scatter radiation. Clearly defined cuss tips work the best. Any kind of clearly defined anatomy within those sites will give you a better orientation for the two files. Now sometimes this is hard to avoid, because if you have if you've got a patient that's got a lot of metal already in their mouth, especially like a full mouth rehab of PFMs, going to be very difficult to find this. And just know that there is no magic cone beam that only sees the teeth and the bone and doesn't see metal. That just doesn't work. Now, your salesman will always show you their finest ConeBeam CT and always show you their opponent's worst ConeBeam CT. Just know that it's important to have a ConeBeam CT. And for me, I want to have at least a 10 by 12 sensor, because if you take a look at that 3D rendered volume there, I can see all the lower jaw, I can see all the maxilla, and all the way back to the condyle. And in many cases, you'll see everything you need for sleep dentistry as well, with airway. So we want to have good scatter-free CBCTs, pick the points. Once you pick those points, you'll see that the software will confirm that you have a good stitch. And the word stitch is, how do they stitch together? How do they overlay the soft tissue STL and the ConeBeam CT? What we can do is look through some of the slices of this and confirm that what you're seeing in the axial, sagittal, and coronal slices is is actually what is in the mouth. And you'll see they're outlined, and the outline should follow those items almost to the T. So the stitch should be tightly outlined to the hard tissue and ConeBeam CT volume. If you have big gaps between these, you'll also have a big gap in the surgical guide, and it'll go to the accuracy of that guide. So we don't want the guides to be so tight that they won't fully seat. We also don't want the guide to be so loose that it rocks and it doesn't deliver the implant to the sites that we know to exist from the ConeBeam CT. Once we've married the two together, we're going to continue on down this list. And since this is a mandibular implant, we're going to start by choosing the panoramic curve for the maxilla or the mandible. Here, obviously, we're going to be replacing 19, so we have it set for the mandible. And approximate the middle of the ridge and the edentulous site. So those purple dots that you see in that that are lined up, those are focal points. And you can move those buccally or lingually, however it takes to draw this pano in the bottom into full focus. Now, this pano is at a very thin slice difference, so we see a lot of variation. We can change the slice thickness of the pano to make it an appearance of having a more traditional panoramic image where you can see all the teeth and it's in a nice, nice smiley face. The pano curve also will determine the path of those 3D slices within the implant planning software. So once we've created the mandibular pano, now we have the opportunity to scroll through this, that blue line that is bisecting the mandible. We can look at it in cross section in the upper box and see that there's the mental foramen entering the mandible, and we're going to mark that mental foramen and the way the nerve comes in there, so that over on you can see it when it goes in there, because we want to see how that looks in our implant planning software as well, because we want to make sure that we stay at least 2 millimeters away from any kind of anatomical landmarks, such as nerves, floors of the sinus, floor of the nose, buccal plates, lingual plates, other teeth. We want to keep a nice buffer around that. You can use the mouse wheel to scroll from left to right when you're in that upper box. And we start distal and move forward. I start with the mental foramens, and then I move backwards to that, just to make sure that we know where that nerve is. We have a hard time. We have a hard time recovering when we hit the nerve for some reason. I've never done that. However, I don't think it's a knock on wood, because I use ConeBeam CT on every single patient, and there should be no reason for that if you're using ConeBeam CT. The next phase, and if you take a look at the Acteon software, what is really intuitive about it is that it's you're creating this from the top down. So you see it went from data import to CPR settings to nerve drawing to teeth setup to implant planning. All we have to do is select the tooth that the implant site is going to go on, and click the STL CBCT volume corresponding points, and it will set up for the implant planning view. Within this planning view, the software has a library of nearly every implant that's manufactured in the world. Now, some of them are obviously lesser, newer ones, and they might not be listed, but the implants that I place are BioHorizons. And so you can choose the manufacturer from the left side that says BioHorizons. And then over on the middle column, you'll see that all the implants that they manufacture are in this library. So the BTA line is the tapered pro line, which I now use. The Laser Lock 3.0 is there. The mount-free internals, like literally every implant that they manufacture lies within this software. Now, once we've chosen like the BTA implant or the Tapered Pro, I'm going to move over to the third column, and that's going to be the actual size of the dental implant. So we've marked our nerve. Is on the bottom right box. You can see the purple round dot, the round cylinder is where the inferior alveolar nerve is. And we're choosing an implant that is right for the bone. So we want to make sure that we have 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters of bone all the way circumferentially around the implant. We want to make sure that it's at least 2 millimeters away from the nerve. And we also need to make sure that the trajectory of the implant is going to be parallel with the contact points of the teeth that it's going in between. If we don't make it parallel between there, then we won't have a path of draw for a screw retained crown. And if we don't have that path of draw, then we'll have no choice but to go to a custom abutment and then a cement retained restoration. Because guided surgery does, I know it makes us more efficient. I know it makes it safer. It makes us easier. But truly, what makes it easier for me is getting it parallel between those contact points, or understanding which contact point I may need to disc or flatten or recontour to allow for the implant final prosthesis to be exactly what we're looking for. Once you've virtually placed the implant in that site, you can see from that middle lower box, it's centered mesially distally between the teeth. In the right box, you can see that it's centered buccolingually, and that the trajectory of the implant is directly opposing the functional cusp. So the functional cusps on the maxillary molars are the palatal cusp tips. And this is now going to occlude down the long axis of the dental implant. Once we've placed that implant, we hit apply, and now all of a sudden it shows up in the ConeBeam CT. Here on the upper right corner, you see the implant in between the teeth like we talked about. The tan or peach colored outline is that of the STL file. And then you also see in the darker green, that is the cylinder, the guide sleeve for the implant being placed with a surgical guide. Now, it's been my experience that getting this implant in here and parallel between the contact points just makes life so much easier. We can also use the software to make this application safer for you and the patient. Most softwares, once you've drawn the nerve in, it will automatically warn you that if you're too close to another implant. It'll even warn you if you have your two implants too close together, so that you can have proper spacing, even with this software. As you can see on the left side, we select our implant. We can select our abutment if we need an angled abutment. And then also at the bottom, we can select the guide sleeve that we're happen to be using. This digital workflow in guide design, you'll see, just keep going down that box. They all move sequentially down that list. And we're looking to 3D print this guide to seat passively on this printed model. The last thing we want to do is have a guide that doesn't fully seat, or a guide that is too loose and it jumps around on you. You can see that, let me back up one. Once we have that in there, we can place our guide sleeve in the appropriate position. Here you see it from the side. It's parallel between the contact points. And now it's time to design the surgical guide And we'll design this around being able to go over these teeth and be able to go far enough down the arch to the contralateral canine to gain stability. If we don't go enough teeth either way, then we lose some of the stability that and predictability that happens with a with a 3D printed model like this. The same digital workflow. Now you look at the next box. Now we're down into the guide design. Let me back up one. You'll see that kind of roped line that goes around this. You set each one of those points, and that's going to be the edge of your guide. So you don't want to get your guide all the way down into the vestibule and onto the soft tissue, because all you're going to do is pinch it. You want to get it just off of the teeth and to engage enough of the teeth that it will sit down and stay put. If you have too many undercuts or non-parallelisms within it, your guide is going to get stopped and is not going to be nearly as accurate as you would like it to be. Now you can see that the guide has been created from that outline. The opening for the guide sleeve is there. The guide sleeves will literally be placed down in there, and we can make sure that we have an adequate thickness of material. If we make our guides too thin, they tend to break. And if we make them too thick, they tend not to go over the heights of the contours of the teeth and allow you to fully seat. Once we've made the surgical guide, you'll see we're going to export this. We can export it as a model STL and an undercut model if you so choose. So let me back up. Once we have this surgical guide and we've created an STL file, we need to then bring it into our 3D printer software. I've used a number of different printers over the years, and again, we've settled out in working with the Sprintray, and I want to spend the last part of this webinar talking about how Sprintray has really created a digital workflow that allows for us to make surgical guides in a very easy and predictable fashion. So on the screen is the new Sprintray Pro. It's black, it's sleek looking, it's got a nice size build plate. To the left of the 3D printer on the far left side is the cure box. This is designed to post-cure the 3D prints. And over on the right side is the Sprintware, which is the software that powers the printer. And I would suggest that you get this software because it too is very intuitive, and it'll do a lot of number of things. So remember, a 3D printer is a 3D printer. It doesn't know that you're printing a surgical guide. It only knows an STL print sequence that you have given it. It doesn't understand anything at all. It only understands hard numbers that were given to it. So the Sprintware software, not only can we make surgical guides from it, but we can print models. We can print them with articulators on them. We can also we can do ortho aligners. Like, just a whole host of things can be done with this 3D printer. This is a peek into the Sprintray, Sprintware software. You can see the blue is the surgical guide that had in the STL format. On the bottom, those stilts or piers that are holding it up, we call them supports. These supports help support this off of the build plate and allow it to have that three-dimensional support that we so need throughout the printing process. So you can determine your density and your strength. You can create supports, you can remove supports, but ultimately you'll figure out what works best for you in your hands. But for me, it's this software for sure. The import guide into your 3D printer software, will allow you to bring that STL in And again, we use the Rayware from Sprintray. The software does have a small nominal charge. You'll find that it's cheaper than anything else out there on the market today. And we've also found that one of the keys to these surgical guides is keeping the intaglio surface up. Myself and Dr. Steve Vorholt, who teaches with me and mans the clinic with me, Steve has really become just a drop dead expert in these in the use of and fabrication of these surgical guides, and even some help in helping an old guy put some slides together for a webinar. So this is this is the Sprintray Pro. If you take a look at the build plate. Here you can see that there's actually 10 surgical guides on this plate. Obviously, we print multiple surgical guides of the same kind like this just because we do them in our hands-ons for our courses. But we can create multiple surgical guides in one print, which is obviously a time-saving process. But if you're just printing models, like you can put multiple patients' models on a build plate, and you can get as creative as you can with arranging them on there so that you can maximize the build plate on your printer. Sprintray also has a number of different resins. So many of them, biocompatible 3D printing materials. There's so many of these resins that they have, and we find them all to be of the highest quality. Here is the surgical guide software that I used and pulled off the machine. And this is one of the coolest things, and I haven't got my hands on this because supposedly it's going to be available in January. But this is the Sprintray wash and dry. So you take that build plate like you see here, and you invert it and set it into the wash machine, and it has a washer and a dryer in here, and it will it starts what we call this post-processing automatic. And I know of no other system out there that has this technology. And the cartridges come out, they're easy to clean, and it just looks good. And I know from some of the beta testers that this thing works like a champ. They also need, in the post-processing, they also need to be cured. And this is the Sprintray Cure Box. And you can put as many of these in there as you can, provided that you can get a proper cure and proper temperature around this. You can see it's got a 30-minute cure, and it keeps it at 60 degrees C so that it's going to maximize the curing of our materials. And then ultimately, the surgical guide is designed to be used as a surgical guide. Here, in conjunction with the BioHorizon guided surgery kit, we have our sleeves. The sleeves are color coordinated to the BioHorizon's implants, and allows us to stay in authentic parts, OEM parts. Like, I can't tell you how important it is for all of the things that we just mentioned. It's really, really important that you only use Sprintray resins with the Sprintray machine. Like, they are calibrated and tested for that machine and those settings. So you don't want to try to skimp by using a cheaper resin, because you only would want to skimp one time and have the implant go in a position that you don't want it to be. The same thing with authentic parts from BioHorizons. Like, you would never want to use a part that wasn't authentic. Because it's not going to fit the print exactly. It's not going to print the keys exactly, and the implant and the hex timing is not going to be exact as well. Here we have a couple images of this case in the mouth, and you can see that we have the keyways and the surgical guide drills going through the keyways to create the osteotomies that are desired. The sleeves are then basically glued into place. They're interlocking into the guide. Some people will put a little adhesive on them, some won't. I like to have them bonded in there so they never come out. And then ultimately, we take a post-op ConeBeam CT to see, where these 3 implants went. You can see that they have nice buccal plates on the outside. Now, you can see from the panel up above, things look a little bit hazy around the implants, but it looks pretty good. And then when you go down to the 3 implants, you'd be like, it looks fuzzy. Maybe that was an action film. Or be mindful that there's so much metal in this patient that you're going to get this scattered radiation. It's called beam hardening, where you will feel like there's no bone on one side or it's in a different position. That is all just relative to the radiation striking these dental implants. So that's kind of, that is our digital workflow as we move through surgical guides into printing. So ConeBeam CT, STL, AIS software, putting them together, implant planning, restoration down. Like what I didn't show on that software is you can also put a virtual restoration in there to make sure that we have screw access holes and such where we want them to be. Once we've planned our surgical guide, we're going to export this STL directly to the Sprintray software, where we will be able to take that STL, place it on the build plate, create the supports needed to have a good print, and the use of their technology through the cure box and the future wash station is going to be super important. So my contact information is on here. That is my cell phone. If you texted right now, it would ring. That is my email. It would also come directly to the phone that's sitting right here on my on my countertop. And we're located in Tempe, Arizona. If you have any questions about the technology that we went over, contact Henry Schein, because they are they're a global leader in providing this kind of technology, and have done wonders for ourselves. So I'm pretty sure that we have some questions in here.
Yes, we do. Thank you very much, Dr. Moody. For those of you still on, we've got about 15 minutes left, so please feel free to drop questions in the chat and Q&A, and we'll get to them as we have time. The first question is, after the learning curve for total plan time and guide time, how much doctor time is needed?
All right. So in any kind of technology, whether, if you're going to print your own surgical guides, you want to limit the amount of doctor time, because, we're only selling our technology in small little blocks of time. So if it takes me an hour to make a design and print and design a surgical guide, it takes a whole hour of my time. My hour could be worth $1,500, $2,000, which would make, all of this not very cost effective. We found that what's nice about the AIS software is you're already done it all through this, and like planning the implant, and all you got to do is rope the thing around, put your sleeve in, and kick it to the printer. So I spend probably no more than 5 minutes treatment planning a single implant. Now, obviously, some multiples might get a little bit more, but I don't spend any more time than about 5 minutes designing the guide. Then we export it over to the 3D printer. Probably the same amount of time in getting it loaded up into the software, supports design. Now these numbers may take you a little more time, early on, but I think the learning curve, once you've done 5 to 10 guides, like, you're going to be kind of an expert, especially in single units, and you'll have 10 minutes of your time. Now, listen, there's going to be printing time and post-processing time, but you can really cut down your time and go do something else. design other guides in that time, or go back to a hygiene check or a filling or whatever. I don't delegate a lot of this to my team, because what you can't do is delegate the implant placement to your team, because you're the one that ultimately owns that. Like I would want to make sure that I know where the implant is always going. But then after that, I think that you could delegate that to quite a few of your team members. That was a great question.
Glad to hear it. Is there a way to get the Acteon software without having their CBCT?
Absolutely. I think there is a fee for it, as there is everything. There's not a lot of things that are free. Now, be careful, because there's softwares out there that say, oh, it's completely free, you just download it. Well, you have to pay to click. There's what we call a pay per click, or you got to pay to export it into the STL. So nothing's really free in this world. So what I know about the Acteon software is it comes with the machine. If you want to buy it separately, you can get it. And then there is no fee. So you can make as many guides as you want from that software.
Is it ever necessary to buff out the surgical guide? And if so, does that get done before the curing process?
I'm not 100% sure about what buffing out means. If it's removing the supports, then you can do that before the cure process if you want. Some people cure them with on, some people cure them without. But any buffing out, I generally haven't had to do. Now, some of the older printers that I had, I won't mention which ones they were, but some of the older printers I had a lot of surface irregularities to it that maybe that's what they're speaking about as buffing out.
Great. That is all of the. Let's see. How long did it take to print the 10 surgical guides in the Sprintray?
Oh, so that print. That print is generally around an hour. Yeah, it's generally around an hour. Like obviously the more there is, they could take a little bit longer, but probably just a shade over an hour.
All right. I was getting ready to wrap up, and now all these questions are coming in.
Perfect.
Do you think this workflow is an affordable option for a single dentist practice?
Yes, it is. Obviously, I look at it this way. If you buy the printer only for surgical guides and you don't do a lot of implants, is it affordable? Yeah, probably not. If you buy the printer and you do surgical guides and you do ortho aligners and you can do study models and you can do night guards, now you're using the machine like you're supposed to. And same way with like the iOS. If you're going to buy it, if you're going to buy it, if you buy a ConeBeam CT just for the if you're gonna buy the ConeBeam software just for implants, then and you don't do a lot of them, it's not great technology either. But if you incorporate it into your new patient experience, and you look for endo and impacted teeth and pathology and airway, it all starts to make sense. So it really depends on how much you use.
I think this is a follow-up question, but why not design the guide in Romexis guide design?
Yeah, you could. It's really pretty much the same type of technology for sure.
Can you explain a little more detail the post-processing process?
Yeah, so post-processing requires a couple things. One, we want to clear off any excess resin. So that's the washing and the drying. And then we also want to fully cure the resin, and that's what the cure box does. So we want to fully cure the resin, and we also want to remove any impurities. So if you don't get a good wash, and I think that's what this new wash dry system is really going to change the way the guides and the models and things are, because it's not going to have that tackiness or that that uncured resin feel on the top of it anymore. So that's what those two machines are about. And listen, before this machine, we had bats with alcohol and we put them in on vibrating plates and that sort of stuff. So it'll be a good addition.
Can you explain the stitching process?
So the stitching is nothing more than, you think it's more like a zipper. It's more like creating the points on the ConeBeam CT and the STL file that allow the software to join those 2 points and stitch them together like a lock and key or like a zipper so that they're together. Because if you have gaps or if you don't have a good fill, then you're going to have voids in your surgical guide, and it may not allow it to either seat or it may be too loose.
And we've got a question that says the wash is with alcohol.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Let's see. Do you prefer intraoral scanner or impression plus desktop scanner?
I prefer an intraoral scanner. And I prefer it for a number of different reasons. I prefer the intraoral scanner because I can have that done prior to me even coming in the room. So part of my implant consultation appointment is a ConeBeam CT and an intraoral scan on each patient, because I can decide whether I want to do a surgical guide or not later on. Even, I can look at it, or I can get into the design and say, you know what, I'm going to make a surgical guide on that, and I already have the data for it. Plus, I can then use that to even make a night guard or a temporary or some other things along the way. So
great. Well, I believe you mentioned it early on, but what intraoral scanner or scanners do you use?
Yeah, we have a number of them in our clinic. We have the Emerald S. We have a 3-disc scanner. My private practice, I've got a Trios. So which one do I like? They all pretty much do the same thing today. And prices are starting to level out a little bit. Like the Medit and the 3D are a little cheaper. Obviously, you can get as expensive all the way up to a Prime Scan. Really depends on what else you're going to do with it and what you're looking for.
Got a couple questions about online implant design software and if you've tried using them.
I mean, there's a number of online implant design softwares out there. It's all a third party. So what's intuitive about the Acteon system, and even like Romexis, is that you can, the ConeBeam is, you've already got the ConeBeam because that's the software you're looking at to use in the ConeBeam, and within that software, you're already virtually placing your implants in those positions. So for you to So I'm gonna do that chair side to be able to tell my patients whether they're a candidate for a dental implant or not. Now, the problem with third parties or onlines is that I've got to then take that ConeBeam CT and the STL, and I got to import them into the third party or online. And then I have to do the treatment planning all over again because that data doesn't transfer with that. So now I've got to draw the curve again. I've got to draw the nerves again. I've got to put the implants back in there. And that's all a redundancy that I don't need to do, and I think is very inefficient.
Is the Sprintray printer an open system?
Correct. It'll take an STL.
Can you use other brands of resins in the Sprintray, or can you only use Sprintray
I do not.
resins?
I only use Sprintray resin.
In the case of a single implant, can you design the guide based on a CBCT scan only without the STL file of dentition?
No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't want to, because your ConeBeam CT is not going to give you the accuracy and the quality of that to create the guide, especially if the arch has a bunch of scatter radiation. And that's the difference, is that you take the points from the ConeBeam and then you take the points from the smooth STL, and when you stitch those together, then now you have that the surface of the STL that you can make it from.
Great. Then we've got one more question asking if the Acteon can scan dentures.
So you can scan dentures to make an edentulous surgical guide, which is called a dual scan protocol. But to scan a denture and to like recreate it, I'm not familiar with that, so I can't speak to that.
Looks like we've got an Actian rep on that's saying yes, it can scan dentures, impressions, or stone models.
Perfect. It's just not in my workflow. Yep.
Does Plymecromexis give you a nice workflow of not having to export and import 3D STL file for intraoral?
I mean, if you're using obviously if you're using the Planmeca ConeBeam CT and the Emerald scanner, like you're gonna have a good workflow there for sure.
Great. I think we made it through all of the questions. So thank you everyone for your participation. Definitely appreciate it. And of course, thank you, Dr. Moody, for your presentation. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to email Dr. Moody directly, or you can contact us at webinars@henryschein.com, and we will get your questions answered as soon as we can. Everyone attending tonight will receive the recording sometime in the next week via email. On behalf of Henry Schein, I want to thank everyone again for attending. Hope everyone stays safe, and I want to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. Appreciate your time.